I'm Sarah Davidson, Chief Executive of Carnegie UK. I'm here today with Dr. Cressida Gaukroger, expert in wellbeing approaches to government. We're going to be talking about a report that she's just written with us called Budgeting for Wellbeing. Cressida, tell me what's in this report and why is it so important?
This report is looking at examples from all over the world of different jurisdictions that have tried to embed principles of wellbeing governance into budget processes, budget rules, fiscal rules, and so on. Budget processes may sound like they don't have a lot to do with wellbeing, but actually they're often one of the main barriers towards governments actually making the kinds of policy changes that they want to make, the kinds of policy changes that would lead to improved well-being for people now and into the future. And as we look at the way in which governments have approached this around the world, what we want to find out is not just what are they doing, but what has worked and why. Because if we want to replicate best practice, we need to know, firstly, what is best practice, and then we need to know the details of how that was embedded into the system, what kinds of cultural change were needed, what kinds of features of any new tools were being introduced, how did they approach politically selling these things, how did they approach changing ways of working if that was going to require significant additional resources. You can't successfully change the way in which government works without thinking about all of these different factors, and this report has tried to pull out some of the more significant factors from the international approaches that we've seen.
Given the challenges that there are to public policy, given the fiscal challenges, we're hearing a lot in different contexts about the importance of shifting to preventative approaches. What has your research told you about what it takes to actually make that happen?
Yeah, so we know that prevention isn't just good for well-being. Obviously, preventing someone from getting sick, preventing people from needing to enter the justice system, preventing homelessness, all of these kinds of things have much better outcomes for people and communities than waiting until the problem has already happened and then jumping in to try to alleviate some of the symptoms. But we also know that it's a fiscally sensible way of approaching these problems. It is much, much cheaper to prevent something bad from happening than to expend resources on trying to rectify it once it's happened. It's very sensible that governments would want to think about how to shift practices towards prevention. The challenge is that the way in which our fiscal systems are set up in government work really undermines their ability to do this. And in fact, it's actively disincentivized. So one key finding that came out of this report is what I call the offset problem. There might be departments that want to put forward preventative initiatives. It might be that Treasury is really keen to get more preventative initiatives through. But when a government department proposes an initiative, if it's picked up by Treasury, that department then needs to find offsets to pay the full upfront cost of that initiative. They need to find cuts either to delivering those frontline services or to their operations. That makes it a really difficult decision for departments because it almost feels morally wrong to divert money and services from people who desperately need it now just in order to reduce acute need in the future. But the only way in which we're going to sustainably be able to manage the tide of need is by thinking in a different way. And one model that is beginning to emerge, and we've seen this actually working quite successfully in the Australian state of Victoria, is to think when you're getting departments to offset the costs of the initiatives, we're not just thinking about the upfront cost, how much it's going to cost to deliver. We're also going to think about how much might this save government through a reduction in demand for the services that government provides. For example, an initiative that tackles homelessness by having a housing first response wraparound services is going to be expensive. Its upfront costs are going to be very high. But we know that people who are rough sleeping are at a much higher likelihood of ending up in hospitals, and it's going to be much harder for them to leave hospitals as early as other people because they don't have a safe place to go. So if you can tackle homelessness, you also potentially significantly reduce the demand for hospital bed stays. And that represents a huge savings or a huge potential saving for government. The problem is we're not factoring those savings into the upfront costs that departments have to offset. And if you can change the way in which we do our budget rules, this not only removes this barrier to preventative thinking, it actually incentivizes departments to start to think, how do we come up with more policies that are going to save government money in the future?
We've been seeing quite a few governments in recent years trying to align their activities with long-term outcomes or holistic all-of-government approaches or wellbeing frameworks, whatever you call it. What have you learned about how budget processes can help with that?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple of things. The first one is that budget processes currently act as a barrier to long-term thinking, a barrier to joint-up thinking. They create silos between departments rather than allowing kind of holistic approaches. For a very long time, been a recommendation, for example, that governments do shared budgeting rather than doling out specific budgets to different departments and getting them to kind of fight over those budget pools. What we have seen in countries that have been more successful in making changes, and obviously no one has solved the problem yet, this is a very long process that's going to involve significant changes across the budget process, is that they have a network of different things that they're all doing simultaneously. And a lot of those are cultural things. That might include setting up meetings and networks at senior levels in government to discuss significant wellbeing commitments, priorities that government wants to work on. We also had an interesting case in New Zealand where government departments were required to earmark a very small proportion of their current expenditure that could be redirected towards government wellbeing priorities. We saw in Ireland that they've been successfully trialling a program of tagging budget bids so that when you put in a budget bid, you also have to say which wellbeing priorities is this bid going to be addressing and how. So there are a whole range of things that if you work in the right way and combine them together, seem to have more power in bringing about that change. It's worth mentioning, though, that the success of a lot of these are not just in bringing in those new instruments or bringing in those new tools, it's about how they're brought in. So in places like Ireland, one of the great advantages of the budget tagging process is this is an opportunity for Treasury to work with departments to talk to them about what it would look like to have a budget bid that contributes to this range of particular wellbeing goals. We've seen in Australian Capital Territory that has now brought in mandatory wellbeing impact assessments for all new budget bids, that the assessment itself played a little bit of work, but it was actually the process of showing how departments could think in a different way, not just about the budget bids that they'd already created, but about how they might be able to tackle problems differently through the lens of a wellbeing approach that actually has been shown to have the greatest impact on change in the way that governments work.
If there was one thing that people should take from this report, what would it be?
We need to focus on what is already getting in the way of us doing the things that we want to do in government. It's very easy to look at other countries and say, they've adopted this new thing, let's just tack that on to what we're already doing. But actually, so much of the processes, the culture, the tools that are being used in government are counterproductive. And at the moment, if we could have a look at what's already going on and say what's working, what's not working, people in government, they know this, right? It's not actually a difficult task. You can go and ask people, why is it that you can't do this thing that we all agree we want to do? And they will tell you in no unclear terms. That needs to be our starting point, because we can bring in as many great tools and measures as we like. If they are butting heads with the barriers that are already existing in the system, we're just not going to make the kind of progress that we need.
Cressida, thank you so much. That's been an absolutely fascinating introduction to the report. If you'd like to read more about budgeting for wellbeing, then you can find all of Cressida's report on our website at carnegieuk.org.